Building a high-end gaming PC can be a lot of fun, but it can also be a frustrating experience. Fortunately, there's no shortage of boutique system builders ready to build a custom PC at a moment's notice. One of those, of course, is Origin PC, who makes some really high-end builds, including this Neuron. They're owned by Corsair, so you'll see a lot of Corsair parts in this configuration. We're going to take it for a spin. We're going to take a look at how it's built. We're also going to take a look at how it's priced out and how that compares to doing it yourself. I'm Ben Funk, and you're watching Hot Hardware. All right, this is normally the spot where you'd see a table of specifications. We're going to build a Neuron together, and because it's off-the-shelf parts, completely standardized, we'll also build this exact same list of components on Amazon to just see what kind of markup there is. So we're on the Origin PC website in an incognito window. We're not logged into anything. We're just going to go together and shop. Pick the Neuron here. I will shop now. And we will customize it because this is not a pre-configured system. So we're using the 5000D airflow. Ours is black. I like black better, so let's do that. The Core i9 14900K. Our motherboard is the MSI MPG Z790 Edge Wi-Fi. That's a mouthful. Now our memory is actually 7200 megahertz. But that's not an option with this motherboard. So we're going to go for the Corsair Dominator Titanium, just like we have, 32 gigabytes. But we're going to stick to 6000 just because it's not an option here right now. But call Origin, and I'm sure that you can do this. Then for cooling, we have Corsair H150i LCD. There it is. So our fans are the QX120. Our graphics card is a GeForce RTX 4090. And of course, we're using Windows 11 Home. Our review unit's operating system drive is a Samsung 990 Pro. The storage drive is actually a SATA SSD, a 2 terabyte Samsung 870 QVO. And then the power supply in our unit is the Corsair RM1200X Shift, which is an 80 plus gold unit. It has all of the connectors on a fully modular power supply on the side instead of kind of like the rear, which makes it easier to manage cables. Now, we did get all of the additional cables that aren't being used in our system in a box with the unit. So you'll get all the extra cables. So if you want to add something later on, that's totally an option. Ours did come shipped in a wooden crate, and so we will add to the cart and we'll see what our total is. But it is $4,625.89. That is including the wooden crate. It is free shipping because that's how Origin rolls. Also, if we back up for just a minute, you'll see that this is based on a current deal that they've got going on, 10% off, which does include our unit. So normally it would be $5139.88. Now it's $4625. All right, so let's go to Amazon. And then this part, shopping for PC components is fun, but it can also be pretty boring. So we're going to speed right on through this and we'll get to the cart. Okay, so we're done shopping, and here's our list that comes up to $4,630. Now, Origin PC will build you the same PC for free, basically, with the same list of components. $4626, $4630. So there's not really a lot of a markup. Now, we are on a 10% discount package for the build. The attention to detail that goes into the build, it's really quite good. They use just the cables they need. They keep them nice and tidy. They've configured the system well. So for the price, if your time is valuable and you don't want to spend your time building and you'd rather wait for them to do it and receive it, honestly, it's kind of hard to argue with. The Origin PC Neuron is a big PC, and that's mostly because the Corsair 5000D airflow in which it's built is also pretty huge. When we look at the Neuron from the side, the only real branding we see is an Origin logo in the lower right corner. The fully glass side is actually tinted to reduce some of the light coming from the 10 total fans inside the case. Removing the panel is just a matter of loosening a pair of captive screws and popping the side off using the tab. Let's take a closer look. Once we take off the side, we can get a good look at all the air moving inside the system. The Corsair H150i LCD has been programmed with an animated Origin logo, which is neat, and the fans are fully RGB LED equipped. The MSI Z790 motherboard has a lot of VRM cooling and full M.2 slot cooling as well. Even the Corsair Dominator Titanium DDR5 memory has lighting. Dominating the lower half of the main chamber is the GeForce RTX 4090 with its 3-slot cooler and single 12 VHP WR power cable. Below the motherboard, shrouded from view, is the RM1200X shift power supply. Airflow in the case is configured as 6 intake fans in the front and side, with 3 pushing air through the H150i LCD's radiator and 1 more exhausting from the back of the case. That's positive pressure airflow, so dust should be kept out if any happens to sneak through the mesh over the intake fans. Around the front, we can see that the 5000D airflow does not have any tempered glass or other solid surface. As its name implies, airflow is maximized and unimpeded thanks to the open front, sides, and top of the case. On the other side of the Neuron, the mostly solid case panel has been custom painted by Origin in blue and orange. The 3 side case fans have plenty of ventilation as well. We can remove this side by removing a couple more captive screws and popping off the panel. Inside, and behind the magnetically closed access door, we can see the cable routing and available drive bays of the 5000D airflow. Origin PC took their time to ensure that cables are routed neatly and anchored by the included Velcro straps. All of the drive bays have removable trays with a single thumb screw, with room for a total of 3 2.5-inch drives and a lone 3.5-inch drive. When we get to the rear of the PC, it's obvious how much external connectivity the MSI MPG Z790 Edge Wi-Fi has. There are 8 USB 3 Type-A ports, a USB-C 10 gigabit port, and a 2x2 20 gigabit USB-C port. There's also analog and digital surround sound outputs, 2 Wi-Fi antenna mounts, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, and DisplayPort and HDMI for the Core i9-14900K's integrated GPU. However, as long as that GeForce RTX 4090 is in the system, we should be using its HDMI 2.1 port or 3 DisplayPort 1.4 ports. And finally, at the bottom, we can see the power connector for the system. Now that we've taken a tour of the Origin PC Neuron, it's time to start running some tests. First up is BrowserBench.org's Speedometer 2.0. This real-world test of various JavaScript frameworks in a sample web app reports its score in runs per minute. With scores averaging around 470, web browsing is smooth and responsive on the Neuron. Cinebench is a CPU-focused rendering test based on Maxon's Cinema 4D rendering engine in both single and multi-threaded scenarios. The Neuron scored in line with our Core i9-14900K testbed, with 2200 in single-threaded performance with a score of over 34,000 in multi-threaded. Blender is another popular rendering application, and the Blender rendering benchmark runs against 3 sample scenes. Again, performance is as we expect, with samples per minute scores of 250 in the monster scene, 150 in the junk shop, and 115 in classroom. Geekbench 5 is a synthetic benchmark that tests against a variety of theoretical system loads. In this test, we saw a warning in the Geekbench browser about an issue with timers on the system. I also received this warning on a Core i7-12700K PC, which was running at stock settings, so maybe it's an issue with the newer Intel CPUs and the latest build of Geekbench 5. The Neuron was incredibly stable in our use, so we don't think there's anything wrong. PCMark is the gold standard in productivity tests, and in this instance, the Neuron acquitted itself very nicely with a score of over 9100. In particular, the digital content creation score was quite high at over 16,600. That's due in large part to the GeForce RTX 4090 in the system. When we start focusing on 3D graphics performance, 3DMark TimeSpy is the place to start. Its DirectX 12 benchmark is pretty tough when it comes to raster graphics loads, and the Neuron rises to the occasion. Its score of 33,000 is about what we would expect for this system. 3DMark Port Royal is a grueling ray tracing test that uses DX12 Ultimate's ray tracing. Again, the system's GeForce RTX 4090 comes to the rescue, and it scores over 24,000. Also, the DirectX Ray Tracing or DXR feature test in 3DMark shows high performance. This test uses a static 3D scene and moves the camera around to gauge how fast ray-traced graphics can be rendered. The Neuron was able to push frames at around 137 frames per second. Finally, it's time to talk about games and take our gaming PC for a spin. Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker's benchmark is a good representative of how the complete game should run on this system. With maximum settings and a resolution of 2160p, it turned in a performance of nearly 190 frames per second on average, and a low that was still up over 90. That's not really a challenge for the Neuron. The same is true for Forza Horizon 5, the open-world racing game from Microsoft. Much like Final Fantasy, it ran at maximum settings and a UHD resolution, and it scored nearly 170 frames per second in the benchmark. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is the first ray tracing test we ran, with all of the game's graphical settings cranked to the max and ray tracing turned up all the way. While frame rates were lower in this title, it still averaged around 99 on this run, and it's still silky smooth and it looks great. The same is true of F1 2022, which uses ray trace lighting for shadows and reflections. Just like Guardians of the Galaxy, this test was run at max settings with ray tracing enabled at a 4K resolution, resulting in right around 100 frames per second as well. Cyberpunk 2077's latest update uses ray trace global illumination, and this is where we need to turn on DLSS. With frame generation enabled and DLSS set to the quality setting, the Neuron was able to crank out an average of 75 frames per second in our test run. It looks gorgeous, of course, and the GeForce RTX 4090 runs it very well. The Witcher 3 is an older title, but it also got a ray tracing update that includes global illumination. When we use similar settings to those in Cyberpunk, with all the settings cranked and global illumination enabled, but with DLSS and frame generation turned on, we got closer to 100 frames per second. The extra graphics juice that comes from the next generation update made it look really great, and the Neuron handled it really well. Finally, Remedy's Alan Wake 2 just launched on the Epic Games Store. You can read all about performance in our review over on hothardware.com, but this is our first look at the game with the GeForce RTX 4090. Just like before, we turned all the settings up all the way, enabled quality DLSS with frame generation, and went for a walk in downtown Bright Falls. Performance was again really great in this punishing title, with average frame rates hovering in the 90s in town. I will say though that in the forest the frame rate dips, but with average frame rates hitting the mid-70s, it's still quite playable this way. The Origin PC Neuron has a ton of cooling hardware. Between 7 120mm case fans and the fancy 360mm all-in-one cooler, there's just a lot of air moving. Thanks to the 5000D airflow case, ventilation is really great, but noise does escape from the system under load. At idle, it's barely registering above the noise floor on our sound meter in the low to mid-30s. Under load, the Neuron's fans will spin up and down noticeably as the temperatures and loads change. The loudest the system got was around 51 or 52 A-weighted decibels while playing Alan Wake 2. Once the temperatures would drop, the fans would slow down and they'd register noise in the mid-40s decibel range. Power consumption on the Neuron at idle is a little higher than we initially expected, but when we thought about the fact that it does have 10 fans, and those fans have 34 RGB LEDs apiece, and the CPU cooler has a programmable LCD, it just started to make a little more sense. Power consumption at idle was around 120 watts, according to our trusty kilowatt. Under a gaming load, again while playing Alan Wake 2, power usage bumped up closer to 600 watts, with the occasional blip that went as high as 620 at max. Overall, the Neuron has high-powered gaming hardware, so this power consumption really isn't out of line. Alright, now that we've taken the Origin PC Neuron for a spin and put it through its paces, what do we think? This is a beast of a PC, but a lot of that just has to do with the configuration that we were provided for review and what we could build in the configurator on Origin's website. I mean, it's got a Core i9-14900K, a GeForce RTX 4090, the two fastest gaming components that you can buy, basically. Lots of memory, plenty of storage, and a lot of expandability for storage. The case is big and high quality and pretty heavy. There are so many fans in this thing, 10 in total, counting the 3 on the all-in-one CPU cooler and 7 case fans. The list of parts goes on, which is why the price is about $4,600. Now, building this exact PC yourself and buying the parts on Amazon doesn't really save you anything. It's also about $4,600. Now the good news is you don't have to spend that much money. If you don't want the highest end gaming PC on the planet, you can start with the base model, which has a GeForce RTX 4060, an Intel Core i5-13600K, and you can also go with AMD parts. There are a couple of Radeons in the configurator. There's also several Ryzen 7000 CPUs available with, of course, compatible motherboards that go along with them. So you can build Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, whatever you're looking for. And at least right now, it's priced really competitively with doing it yourself. Now, eventually that deal will probably end and the price will go up. So the question then becomes, is the margin worth it? Is this worth $5,100? Well, that depends on what kind of builder you are. If you love to get in there and do it with your hands, I'm not sure why you're watching this video. If you're not comfortable doing that, especially with a very high-end build, and you want somebody to do it for you, then Origin will do it for you, and they'll ship it to you in a big wooden crate to keep it safe. And they will do a really phenomenal job in terms of cable routing and the clean look of the build. They did a really nice job here. So you have to decide, is that premium worth it? And the only person that can answer that is you. So this has been the Origin PC Neuron. I've been Ben. You've been great. Thanks for watching Hot Hardware.